Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar discussion video. In this one I want to talk about how a successful Avatar merchandise line is going to be important for Avatar Studios to also be a success. That we need the merch to do well to kind of, justify Paramount's overall interest in the franchise. Like the merchandise line, I don't think a lot of people are focusing on it, but I think it needs to be something that, is given attention. The reason we know there's a merchandise line coming is because we did get two bigger pieces of news about merchandise last year, and so I'll go over them and then we can talk. So, first of all, in Toy World magazine from January 2024, Paramount Consumer Products and Experiences had an interview, and they talked about how they're doubling down on their big franchises for 2024, the likes of Paw Patrol and TMNT, which we all know have a big Toyline presence, but they're also going to be setting the stage for two long-awaited reinventations, those being Avatar and also Dora. Now, ultimately, over the year, we didn't really see anything that really represented this. Did much of the merch stuff that happened last year show this? Not really. But I think what they were referring to was this announcement that happened in the middle of 2024. So a bunch of months after that Toy World interview. We got this news that Jazzwares, the toy company, have signed a master licensing agreement with Paramount Global for Avatar: The Last Airbender, but also Dora, SpongeBob, Star Trek, and Yellowstone. So you'll note there Dora is included here as well. It was mentioned in the other one, of course, and SpongeBob is also going to be getting some Jazzwares stuff as well. But interestingly, Avatar got the headline. This is an announcement of multiple deals, but them getting Avatar was the headline from multiple outlets, basically. A lot of the quotes in the actual press release is specifically about Avatar. It is still general for multiple franchises, but it is kind of Avatar focused, which is nice to see. Now, what is it? So it's multiple contracts to release toys, costumes, accessories based on these properties. Then they specifically say Jazzwares will hold global master rights to produce figures, toy vehicles, dolls, plush playsets for Avatar franchise. We'll talk about this in a second. Also, North American rights for costumes and accessories, plus other stuff. But yes, when they say franchise, this is one of the big discussion points. Does that mean the entire Avatar franchise? As in, they can do Kora merch, ATLA merch, and that also going forward, they have basically the toy line for the Aang movie, if they're going to do that. And the Earth Avatar series when that happens. Like everything new that Avatar comes out, basically Jazzwares has the toy line. That's my takeaway. But also, this is where we get into weirdness, because from a licensing point of view, Avatar: The Last Airbender is treated sort of differently than Legend of Korra. They are two licenses for the most part that we have seen multiple occasions where we've asked, hey, can you do Korra as a part of this project? And they say, no, we only have the license for Avatar. That's what happened with the Journey of Aang game. That's why Kora isn't a part of it, because they only have the license for Avatar, which is kind of weird. But is Avatar on its own a franchise excluding the other stuff? Or does this just mean the franchise that is Avatar, that is mainly known for Avatar: The Last Airbender? We don't know. It doesn't get into any specifics because it's very business focused. I think we all hope it's everything, and the timing of it going to be a 2025 release. This stuff, the portfolio of stuff between Paramount and Jazzwares has an expected retail set in 2025. So that would make sense, especially if it's maybe a late 2025 release. The months leading up to the movie, there will be a merchandise line. Now, the question also comes up of, is this just for the movie, or is this going to be like we're also going to do our book 1, 2, 3 Aang kind of merchandise line, but it will also include stuff for the movie? Will it include the rest of the franchise? It's unclear, but that's an interesting discussion to have, is what would be the most ideal way to do this to make it a success. So straight away, this seems pretty good. Paramount are invested in making Avatar a success on the toy line to, give it that kind of business advantage. It seems like Jazzwares are going all in on this, making a full-on toy line figures, toy vehicles, dolls, plush, playsets. That seems very good. It's just about, hey, can they finally make a successful Avatar toy line? Because we have to, I think, have a little bit of a history lesson here on Avatar when it comes to toy lines, and how ultimately, I'm not sure if you can full on say Avatar has been a failure from a merchandise perspective, but it is certainly never timed a lot of its merchandise stuff particularly well. Now, when I say merchandise, I'm basically not really talking about books publishing. I'm talking about like toys, figures, that sort of thing. So, brief history lesson. Avatar did have an original toy line back in 2005, 6, 7-ish. But what ended up happening, as I'm sure most of you know, is that basically it fell apart. It didn't really happen. It got cancelled, whatever way you want to say. We didn't really have a toy line by the time the show had come to an end. They basically went past each other. The idea of they went big on the toy line right at the start when Avatar was still building its popularity. And by the time Avatar was popular, they basically decided not to do merch anymore. And so that's basically what happened with the original toy line. I think the toys are kind of nice for what they are, but also this figure is like representative of the problem. They never did a female figure in the original line, so there was never an original Katara figure. They never got far enough to do Book 2 characters, so Toph never got anything. But of course, the significant thing is they didn't do Katara in an ATLA toy line. How? Now, that obviously speaks to, we're talking 20 years ago. Things were a bit different then. They obviously viewed Avatar as being a boys' toy line, and so they didn't do the female characters, completely misjudging the fandom and the way it would go on to be, where it's quite an even mix, I think, and a quite balanced and diverse fandom. It's not just kind of male orientated. So that was a big miss. But also, they not just didn't do the female characters, they did a lot of the male characters in all these various kind of crazy old school action figure styles, where it's just gimmicky versions of the different characters. So here's Aang in Water Tribe clothing. Never appeared in an episode, but it got a figure because they wanted to reuse some of this stuff. Roku got multiple figures, you know, the Spirit World clear version, his normal version. Aang got a spirit version, his normal version with glider, you know, all that sort of stuff. The amount of redos without actually hitting some of your key characters was kind of crazy. I think they were just about planning to do a Katara right as the toy line basically stopped happening. So Avatar kind of came and went with an initial big toy line that just kind of petered out. But you'll remember that there was stuff like Avatar had some original Lego sets. Now, again, they never went past book 1 or anything like that, but it had some stuff. They tried to go in on it initially. It's just they didn't give a new franchise some time to grow. Avatar's a much more established franchise these days, so, you know, there's a little bit more confidence that if you do all this stuff and really push out a big toy line across the board, it will work. So that's that. I'm not really going to talk about The Last Airbender movie, which is kind of the next thing that really happened. It did have a merchandise line. I'm pretty sure it was like literally a 1 or 2 wave toy line that just kind of came and went. I don't think it was terrible, but it also wasn't particularly good either. It just kind of happened. It made sense for them to do it, but because the movie was not well regarded, I don't think the toys were well regarded either. This then brings us into Kora, which is probably the most interesting kind of part of this discussion, especially when we're talking about what the new toy line needs to be. Kora, quite simply, did not have a toy line. Over the 4 books of Kora, we never got a toy line. It's not that Kora never had any merch, but it never had any significant merch. During Kora's run, outside of, you know, we eventually got the art books and stuff like that, Kora got some initial merch from Dark Horse via like lunch boxes, shot glasses, that sort of thing. Just basic imagery, stock art on the stuff. But again, it was done through Dark Horse, so it wasn't really on typical store shelves. It was more of a kind of collector's item type thing aimed at hardcore fans. So they had nothing on the shelves for kids to buy, and it just kind of highlights this is the fundamental problem that happened with Kora, is that it wasn't supported as well as it probably should have been by Nickelodeon across the board in terms of making a toy line happen. Now, part of that might have been the way the show kind of got produced, in that like it was initially only one season, then it got season 2, then it got the final 2 seasons. And they kind of picked up pace a little bit by the time we got to season 3 and 4, because we got the Kora video game, and there's bits and pieces that happened, but it still never fundamentally got a toy line. Like, Kora has never had like an action figure, really. And I think it's super telling that even to this day, we still haven't had that. Everyone has kind of avoided doing it. So for most people, probably if you have a Kora figure in your collection, it's probably maybe one of the Kora Funko Pops that came out. But because this was such a limited run, they only did like the one wave plus like an exclusive here or there. Maybe you don't even have this. There was a Kora Nendoroid figure that came out, which was kind of nice, but it was very much a one-off release. And ultimately, nothing kind of really ever came of that. They eventually did an Aang down the road, but no Kora stuff. So Kora merchandise has been like the publishing stuff, some Funko Pops, a scattered like bit here or there, and then high-end statues like the Korasami statue that cost a couple of $100 that was extremely limited, the made-to-order Dark Horse Direct book 4 Kora statue that again, a couple of $100. Nothing super accessible like Avatar has got. None of those $50 kind of statue diorama type things, for the most part. The best I think we had was maybe like Kora, like from Dark Horse earlier on. We got like a Kora $80 statue, I think it was. But again, because it was through Dark Horse at the time, not the most accessible thing. In terms of merch just being on the shelves at the normal stores, Kora never really had that. It was always specialist stuff, effectively. So, fundamentally, swing and a miss on Kora in terms of merchandise. Would it have having a merchandise line have changed anything? We don't know, because it would have been such a different kind of experience going through the fandom if we had had an ongoing merchandise line. Who knows, overall. And then we're basically talking about the gap period that pretty much I'm assuming is going to end this year when they probably start talking about Avatar Studios. But the last 10 years of post-Kora, the franchise is still active, but is mostly kind of comics, publishing, keeping things going, bits and pieces of merch happening here or there. We have had attempts by companies to do toy lines. Let me just get these in my hands. Diamond Select Toys is probably the most successful overall thing over the years, because they did their initial kind of more collectors orientated figures, and I think they were well regarded. They went on for a bunch of waves. They probably didn't do enough figures per waves. They were probably a little bit too hard to get at some times. And again, they were still more specialty kind of items rather than just walk into a toy store and pick them up. But they were at least more in the vein of what we wanted, and then it led to DST doing their diorama figures, which are actually quite good. But again, these stopped a few years ago, and they haven't done any figures since. Like, the figures seem to just eventually kind of peter out, the interest in them sort of fading, because they weren't exactly what we kind of wanted. The head sculpts maybe not the most ideal there. The most recent attempt at a proper Avatar merch line was probably McFarlane Toys, because they didn't just do like, oh, we have a line and we're doing one size and we're just doing multiple characters. They had multiple stuff. They had the smaller kind of class of figure, the larger class of figure, and they had like the kind of vehicle price point with the animals that they released an Appa and a Komodo Rhino into. The problem here, I think, was that it started off so well. They announced that they were going to do Avatar and that they were also eventually going to get to Kora. Ultimately, the Kora thing did not end up happening. McFarlane didn't release any Kora merch, so it ended up just being the Avatar stuff. And for whatever reason, it just didn't work out for them. I think the timing maybe wasn't ideal here, because it was kind of right. I guess the development on this must have happened prior to Avatar Studios properly being a thing, and I think that just messed up a lot of stuff with merchandise around the time. But either way, the problem with this was that it felt like it was meant to be like the relaunch of the Avatar toy line, like 20 years on. So everything was book one, and there was almost this weird lack of acknowledgement that like the show's been done and over for years, and that people care about the franchise overall. You don't have to start at the beginning. It doesn't need to be book one everything. I understand it. At some point in the toy line for Avatar, you probably want a book one Zuko, but you probably need to do your book three Zuko earlier than you think you need to. And the same goes for just a lot of the other stuff. It's like Aang. What about book 3 Aang as like a redo? What about book 3 Katara? That design basically hasn't been done like anywhere except a statue here or there. Those are the problems that ended up happening. McFarlane also, I think, fell into the trap, what kind of has affected the Avatar toy lines of like the Aang and Zuko problem of just let's redo Aang and Zuko multiple times on the different price points, but not do the other characters. Because at the bigger size point, which is actually kind of nice, they only did 3 figures. And it was Aang, Zuko, and Sokka. And then there was a slight exclusive different versions of Aang and Zuko. But they never did Katara in the kind of collector's kind of larger price point. They did Katara and Toph, and I think an Azula in the smaller one, which was good, definitely an improvement. Finally kind of seeing some of that stuff happen, that like across DST and McFarlane, finally some of those characters had got toys for the first time. It's just that I think there was just a sense immediately that they're not going to do the characters that we want. And as the waves went on, and it was clear that by the time we got to wave 2 and 3, and the amount of new characters being introduced into the line began to like really trail off, and there's so much more that still needs to be done, it became a bit of a problem that I would define it as being, it's like the Mei and Ty Lee problem, which is that the amount of confidence I have in a figure line of doing a Mei and a Ty Lee figure, because they're characters where you need to do them eventually, but they're probably not figures that appear in your first like 1, 2, or 3 waves. So it's the confidence of, is this toy line going to get to wave 4 when you're finally going to give me one of the new characters that I'm looking for? And a lot of, I think, toy lines have failed that test pretty heavily, to the point where I'm pretty sure the only company that's actually put out a Mei and a Ty Lee is basically Funko, by having pops of those characters. And Funko tends to do almost anything, so that's maybe not even the best example. But the idea is that this line certainly didn't really get close to them, really. And that's what I want to see. It's for the new stuff going forward, what it has to learn from the kind of failures of some of the previous toy lines is that when you do ATLA, and if you eventually do Kora, realize that like you don't have to start at the very beginning. Realize that you can do a bit of a variety toy line here by using the entire franchise to your advantage, and you can plot out interesting waves of figures nicely in that way. And that's why I think what this needs to be is, one, I definitely want Kora to be part of this. I think for variety's sake, I think it is required. That it would be weird if Kora gets ignored again. Like it's Kora still has not had an action figure. I think they need to do it. I think it needs to basically be, in my mind, an Avatar Legends toy line that has like, you know, Jazzware's Avatar, but that it can have a kind of logo change stuff going on in the background to represent kind of what era it's from. So here's ATLA, here's Legend of Korra stuff. If they really want to, you know, here's Kyoshi era. Here's Kyoshi. It makes sense. They're probably at some point, if this toy line is a success, there probably will be a Kyoshi. But is Rangi a possibility in this toy line? I think that would be a big one for hardcore fans, is to see that you can do some of these characters who only appear in the novels in this stuff to make that character, you know, stand out a little bit more. That's a very unique figure to have in a line if you did something like that. And again, a lot depends on how many figures are going to be in each wave and what way they go about doing this. Because sometimes some of these kids' lines can be quite bad about doing that introduction of new characters. That, you know, if you need basically an Aang and a Zuko pretty much to be in nearly every wave, or in probably Aang's case, in probably every wave, it takes away a slot for a new character in every wave. So how do you manage that? Well, for Aang, it's kind of somewhat simple, is that you've got book 1 Aang, you've got book 2 Aang, you've got kind of comic outfit Aang. He has a few different outfits that you can put him into to kind of make use of the Aang mold to kind of redo it again. Same goes for Zuko. You know, you can do book 1 Zuko, but you can also do book 3 Zuko. Now, the difference there is that to a certain degree, it's not much mold kind of reuse there, but you know, it's just that idea that you're ultimately going to face. Avatar perhaps doesn't have the obvious repaint potential that maybe other things do, where you do have to use the different outfits, I think, more than maybe certain other franchises. But I think that's what they need to do, is that to open the door for like the new content to immediately have a merchandise line. I think the merchandise line that you establish whenever it comes out has to be open to the entire franchise. And so Avatar and Korra being there from the start is essential, because what do you want from a wave 1? Do we want the standard sort of Aang, Zuko, Katara, Sokka or something like that, which has kind of often been kind of what the wave 1 is? Or would we prefer it to be maybe like Aang, Katara, Kora, and like Bolin or something like that, and then wave 2 can be, you know, Zuko, Asami, Mako. You know, you can use that variety to your advantage. And then if you get into the later waves, and like here's a Kyoshi, but then here's another character from Kyoshi's era, those are options. A lot depends on what the price point is. I think the more you go kind of like big on the price point and it's more of a collector's orientated item, the more you're going to have to be selective with the characters. But again, the big thing for me is a line like this eventually going to get to a Mei or a Ty Lee? Or are we going to be stuck in the early days of the main characters for waves upon waves before we get to that stuff? So you have to balance that out. Show that you can get to the deeper cut characters for the collectors, but also, you know, do the main characters well by themselves. Figures make sense, like that's the obvious thing. Vehicles is obviously going to be animals to a certain degree, so Appa. Komodo Rhino's been a typical one, but again, it's a very early book 1 thing, like the fact that 2 Toylines have done that now. I'd like to see them take some of the later series stuff into play here a little bit and just show a bit more variety in this regard. Kora definitely would be one that, you know, would benefit from the toy vehicles where you can do Sadomobiles and stuff like that. Like Kora and Naga is a really nice, I think, obvious place set that the sizing there probably works out quite nice. Dolls is an interesting one because I don't think we've ever properly had an Avatar doll. Migo Aang, I guess, technically, but, you know, this is, I'm guessing, going to be like a Kora, Kora, maybe a Katara doll. Maybe they'll just have a separate like doll line where it includes most of the characters, but I'm guessing the idea here is fabric clothing, kind of actual kind of hair, basically. Plush makes sense. Playsets is also quite unique because outside of Lego, we haven't really seen this for Avatar, like an actual, you know, building type thing. I don't know what they're going to do here necessarily, because when I think of Avatar locations, I usually go pretty big. Like it's an air temple, it's a fire temple. It's one of the main buildings from one of the main like locations. And that doesn't really jump out immediately as this is an obvious playset. Like Earth Rumble playset, that makes sense. That seems kind of doable and simple. But otherwise, these might have to be quite big and large. But if they do stuff like that, that speaks to the confidence that they could have in this. So, interesting. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there just with the idea that when we finally start to get news about this toy line, I think the details of this are going to be very telling for us being able to get some initial judges on how kind of confident they are in this, how well things are going to go. because I think if this toy line comes out and we get news that it's ATLA, it's all book one characters, I'm sure that will do well, but it won't necessarily be the step in the right direction that I think maybe the franchise needs, because it would be really telling that the franchise is still stuck with ATLA as being the only thing as we go into like a new era, basically. And look, I get it. You have to do it to a certain degree because your movie that's coming out is an Aang movie. But does your toy line include figures for those older versions of the characters? And that's key as well. Will we finally, for like the first time since like 2005, get figures for characters that are in like active content at the moment? That's the big thing here that we need to see. But it looks like Paramount are kind of going in on this. This deal, I think, is quite good for Avatar, because Jazzwares feels like a company where Avatar could become one of the big IPs that they have if this works out well for them. Whereas Avatar might have been forgotten if it was more picked up by like a Hasbro or one of the other bigger companies. So I think there's an option here for things to go quite well, because merch has not been in a particularly strong spot for the last 2 years. There really hasn't been all that much merch. And I think the reason for that is because the build up to this has created that kind of gap. Because no one wants to release waves upon waves of stuff, knowing that the interest in Avatar merchandise is going to be about new stuff and surrounding this new toy line more than anything. So I hope this all comes together really nicely and it's not just another missed attempt at an Avatar toy line. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. How do you think they're going to do the new Avatar toy line? What's your view on Avatar historically as a toy line thing? What should they do for this? But yes, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.